Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm checking out the much anticipated Eachine EV200D FPV goggles. Now, Eachine has advised that this is a prototype that they are sending out to reviewers, and we are to report back with constructive criticism with the intention of them potentially making some changes for the production release. So I've given them some initial feedback and they have literally given me the thumbs up to make a video about 2 minutes ago, and I think with this being a prototype, that is actually pretty good of them. And I can tell that whoever has developed these goggles has put an extreme amount of work into this goggle. So I'm going to talk through things in order of importance for me. And the first one is fitment. And in general, they feel pretty comfy. I am getting a small amount of pressure on the bridge of my nose, but I have a fairly big nose. And the fitment of these compared to the Onway Commanders feels about the same. And the cutouts are very similar to the Onways. It's only the Fat Sharks that give me complete clearance, but I have a feeling that most people who are comfortable with the Onways will be fine with these. I did notice that these came with the thick foam fitted to them, and the foam is attached via Velcro, and they give you a thinner piece with the package, and I get a lot of discomfort with the thinner padding, so I'll be sticking to the thicker pad. And with that, my eyes line up to the screen pretty nicely, and I get a full view of the screen without any blurriness or anything like that. Now, I have no doubt that it might not be the case for everyone, and I'm yet to find two people who have the exact same experience with a goggle. And on the Let's Drone Out podcast, we had Fat Shark on one of the episodes, and there were 4 of us, I think, and not a single one of us could agree on what the perfect goggle should be, and that's exactly why the perfect goggle doesn't exist, because everyone has their own needs when it comes to face shape, and their opinions on power buttons, field of view, DVR, etc. It's just impossible. So for me, I think if I cut away this part of the faceplate, my nose would be completely free. They do provide this top strap, which if you use does relieve a little bit of the pressure on my nose, because these goggles are heavier than normal, as you can imagine, with the Multiversity modules. And I should say I get a clear image, but that is with the IPDs maxed out to the sides with my wonky face. And I'm not going to comment too much on the IPD adjustment. All I'll say is that from speaking to goggle manufacturers, the goggles will have to get bigger if we want more IPD adjustment, because they physically can't fit the mechanism in there. So across the board, in this form factor, the IPD adjustment is limited, but you know, I can just about make them work for me. So onto the screens, and they're using the Alcos technology, which I was surprised to see at first because it didn't work well with the Top Sky goggles, and I reviewed both V1 and V2 of the Top Skies, but for me there have been some pretty drastic improvements with this system that they're using compared to the Top Skies. So to give you a bit of background, I used to repair projectors for a hobby, so I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to trying new technology in a goggle, but when they put the Alcos system in the Top Skies, it just didn't work. But now they have reworked the system, I think it is a viable option. So the ghosting that was present in the Top Skies is non-existent in this version. I'm not sure how they have done it, because when I tore the Top Skies apart, I couldn't see how they could improve it. But with the Top Skies, when you turn them on, you could see the Alcos display lighting up above the eyepiece, and that is not the case with this screen. So my best guess is that they've done some clever work with the polarizing or completely reworked the system, but I don't care because it just works. And the upshot of that is, I think the ghosting was causing some blurriness in the image, and for me, that's gone as well. So we're now able to see the true benefits of Alcos in an FPV goggle, and those benefits are a higher resolution of 720p and no pixels in view. And the mirror system that Alcos uses means that your eyes don't have to look as far into the distance to focus on the image. So if you are mildly short-sighted, then you might not need diopters to see a good image. But my prescription is -2, so they are just slightly out of focus for me, but that is fine, because unlike the top skies, the Fat Shark diopters fit in there, and they fit well, and they work. So the improvements don't just stop there either when it comes to the screens. You see, one of the traits of Alcos is that it sends RGB in sequence, so that's red, green, and blue light. And just like with DLP, so some of you who have DLP projectors at home will also see this, you get something called the rainbow effect. And this is where you look around the screen and your eyes can temporarily sync to the refresh rate of each individual color. And I saw that with both of the top skies, but not with this one. And it's only when I hook up to the HDMI and blink really fast that I can see something that resembles the rainbow effect. So at a guess, they have upped the refresh rate of the panels to a point where my eyes can no longer spot it. And when I'm flying FPV, I cannot see any artifacts whatsoever. Now, I should say that the rainbow effect is something that is very specific to an individual, but I can only say that it's non-existent for me with this, and there's been a clear change to the screen against the top skies, and I like it. Now, if I put a camera up against these screens, then that is not going to be any good, because the shutter speed of the camera is going to sync to the RGB sequence, and that's not going to look any good. And as I've explained in other videos, you can't show how good an FPV screen is in a review. You can only describe it. It's another reason why goggle reviews suck. And I wish I could just let every single one of you have a go of them, because that's the only way you'll know if they are for you or not. So other than that, the screens are a 42-degree field of view. You'll notice, unlike the top skies, we don't have the sensor to turn these screens on and off when they are not on your head. Instead, they've gone with a fan that runs constantly, which is separate to the defogging fan. At least I think it's a fan. I think this unit is too small to run a color wheel, and that would make a similar sort of noise to a fan. But I can feel some air coming out the bottom of it in there, so I think it's a fan, but I'd have to strip it apart to find out what's fully going on. So I think rather than turning the screens off when they aren't in use, they've gone for a cooling option. Either that, or there's something else in there that needs to be cooled down, like a processor or something. And I guess the unknown thing at this point is the durability of these screens. So that's only something we'll know over time and as more people use them. And it's a reason why I still push Fat Sharks, because they are easy to get fixed if there's a problem. And if you don't like the idea of a fan running while you're flying, then this might bother you, but I couldn't hear it as soon as I got outside and I was flying, and you had the background noise, and the noise of the copter just drowned that out. So, is this now as good as the LCDs found in other goggles? And the problem with me answering that is, it's opinion based. So, here is my opinion, but it's definitely not a fact. I think LCDs are slightly sharper and they have a slightly better contrast, but you can see individual pixels, and that gives what they call in the VR world a slight screen door effect. Now, Alcos, it has richer colours, and because there is no pixels to spot, the image looks smoother. And I think now they have sorted the ghosting issues with Alcos, it's brought them much closer together as a competitor. And that's as far as I'm willing to go, I think. You know, I think LCD fans will hate it, and the open-minded Alcos fans will really like it. So next I want to talk about the aspect ratio. So they are a 16:9 screen natively, but they do switch to 4:3. So we have a menu button on the top, and if you hold it to the left, then a menu pops up where you can change the brightness, contrast, and color by using the up, down, left, and right on the joystick. So my first bit of criticism is that moving through the options left and right is really slow, and the goggle beeps each time it makes a change, and you have to sort of sit there and wait while the option increases or decreases to your liking. I also think that with Alcos, the brightness and color settings are software controlled. I know when I took the top skies apart, changing the brightness and contrast didn't alter the backlight panels. So it's quite limiting in terms of what you can do regarding changes to the screen. But what I will say is that the screens are pretty good anyways and don't need much adjustment from my experience. And I'm going to add a caveat here, because if you're using one of the high-end CMOS cameras out there, such as the Predator or the Sparrow, then those cameras have a cool bluey white balance to start with, and the colours are much richer than CCD cameras as well. And this isn't something that you notice too much through an LCD screen, but with Alcos, it's all amplified, so the image looks bluer, the colours look richer, and the chromatic effect that those cameras have in the first place is more noticeable with Alcos. So I found that if I reduce the colour saturation in the settings, it calms all of that down and it gives a really nice picture. And when I use a CCD camera through these goggles, it looks very similar to how a CCD camera looks through the Omway goggles. Anyways, I got off track there, so if you hold down the menu button again for a couple of seconds, then you have a second page where you can set the aspect ratio to 4:3 or 16:9, and you can also set the input source. Now, I've checked both PAL, NTSC and Auto, and they all work as they should. There is a slight cropping to the right hand side of the screen in NTSC, but it's only a few pixels, and it's not an issue in PAL, but I am going to be feeding that back. And I think that's all I want to say about the screens. You know, it's an important part of the goggle, in my opinion, is that I do think they have turned this Alcos system into a viable competitor, and if it lasts the distance, then, you know, even better. So I'll show you a comparison of the field of view against some of the competitors to give you an idea. But it's important to note that you are to take nothing from the quality of the image with these shots, in the same way that you wouldn't judge the video quality of a movie having watched it through someone pointing a camera at a cinema screen. So for me, the next most important thing is the DVR. They have gone with the same placement as the Fat Sharks for the micro SD card, which I actually like, but I do understand people finding it fiddly to get through the faceplate, and quite often mine will ping across the room to get it out, so be careful. The faceplate does detach, by the way, it's just clipped in. And it will take up to a 32GB card, and I've been using a Class 10. The DVR is fairly easy to use, but it's a little bit confusing at first. So you plug your battery in, and yes, I know, no power button, I'll get onto that later. And then you long press down the DVR button, and you have to press it for about 10 seconds, which seems too long, doesn't it? But I'm sure there's a reason for it. Then you'll get the words rec showing up in green on the screen, and you'll also get a beep from the goggles. And then it's a single press to start the recording, and then the recording icon will go red in the screens, and of course it's another press to stop the recording. Now, the listing says that if you pull the battery while the DVR is recording, then it will save your footage, and I tried it and it didn't work. But then I found a little note in the troubleshooting section of the manual, and it said that it will only save the file after the 2-minute mark. So that's not quite the same, is it? And it also mentions that you have to play the file in VLC, which suggests that VLC will fix a broken index. So to me, that's not quite doing what it says. Now, it's not a showstopper, and I'm so used to pressing the stop record button from the original Fat Shark days when they also didn't have that feature. So I tend to remember to stop the recording anyways, but it's definitely worth a mention because I don't think it's something that they can change. And rather than there being a super cap in there, I think it's more of a feature of X264, so that it will just automatically produce a usable file after 2 minutes, but that is just a guess. I'm just guessing there. Other than that, the DVR seems to record fine regardless of PAL or NTSC format, so it's not cropping off any of the on-screen display. It records in the X264 format, as I mentioned, with AVI being the container. Now, the manual says that the resolution is 1280 by 720p, but that's not what I have here. It's recording at 720 by 576, which appears a little more stretched on the vertical than the Fat Shark DVR. And of course that can be corrected in an editor, but I think the biggest downside of the DVR is the low bitrate, so it's only recording at 2 megabit against the 13 megabit of the Fat Sharks. And that is reminiscent of the Top Skies, isn't it? But it is usable. I'm kind of getting the impression this goggle is a mix of the Top Skies and the EV100 put together when it comes to firmware. It does also split the files after 5 minutes, but I've only actually had that happen to me once, as most mini-quad flights are under 5 minutes. But it does mean that each time the file splits, it's going to have to go past the 2-minute mark in order for it to save something to the SD card if you pull your battery without stopping the recording. Now, it records at 25 frames per second, which is on par with other DVRs on the market, but the manual does say that it records at 30 frames per second, and it's not doing that. And I've also had a couple of instances of the DVR recording at 20 frames per second, so I'm going to be feeding that back. And the DVR does record audio, but it seems to be really out of sync of the video, so I can't say you can use that. I'm not an audio user anyway, but it's worth mentioning. So the most important reason for having a DVR, in my opinion, is finding your lost model when you have had a crash. And once you're in the recording mode in the DVR, you can hold the joystick to the right for a few seconds, and then you will see all of your videos on the SD card shown nicely with a thumbnail. And you can then use the joystick to enter the desired video and then fast forward and rewind to the point that you need to. So that bit is the same as the Top Skies, but all of that is working well. You know, it seems an impossible task for companies to bring a DVR out that is of high quality. But after speaking to a lot of people and designers, it turns out that it's really hard because everything in our hobby is repurposed from other products. And modern day recorders and codecs aren't designed to deal with static and analog video. And that's why we aren't seeing any progress with these DVRs. There just isn't the demand in the mass market to record old, crappy video, and there's certainly not the demand to do it well, apart from us, of course. So the next important thing is the diversity, or in this case, multi-diversity. And this is where this goggle comes into its own a bit, because no other goggle at this price point offers all of this, which is 2 included diversity modules that are linked up to each other to provide multiversity, and as far as I can tell, it does work. So underneath this removable faceplate here, we have 2 further clips that hold in the modules, so the modules don't have a display on them, and both of them have RPSMA antenna connectors. But they are linked to the band and the channel that you see through the on-screen display of the screen. And of course, they are removable and they accept aftermarket modules. Now, I say accept because Eachine is doing something new here. So if you put, say, a Furious FPV module on the left side and something else on the other side, such as the standard module, it will just use the left hand side because both modules have to talk to each other, so they are on the same channel. And at the moment modules aren't designed to do that, but I'm sure if Eachine can do it, then I'm sure that there's a way the others can do it. It's just a new thing that they've come up with. And it's kind of funny because when the pictures came out of this 8 months ago, people thought it was a bit of a daft idea, but we're now seeing things like the Dot King doing something similar. The only thing I'll say is that it's a heavier goggle with all of the antennas and the modules on there, and it's also a lot of stuff to power up for one battery, but it does seem to do it all. And they haven't provided any antennas in the kit, which I think is actually a good call because it keeps the price down and we all use our own custom antennas anyways. So they have provided this really nice panel with windows on them, so you can see the screens of the aftermarket modules, and that's the kind of thinking that we don't really see from anyone else. One thing that you might want to do if you are using aftermarket modules with this goggle is to put some sticky tape on the back to secure them in, because of course the stock plate that keeps in the stock modules won't fit over the aftermarket modules, and they've been really clever giving you a little bit more room with this window so that you can put bigger modules into it, but it does mean that the module moves around a little bit and it's not as secure as a proper case. And if you are wondering, no, the Dominator module cases don't fit, they are a different sizing. So is Multiversity any benefit? Well, I'm not so sure, because when I was flying with them in my open field, I do think I was getting less breakup compared to using the Furious module on its own in this goggle with the same antennas. But when I went behind the trees, the Furious module did a much better job in terms of breakup than the Multiversity did. And I think you could argue that the Furious system is like a quarter of the price of these goggles on its own. And the idea of buying into this goggle is that it already comes with the modules. And for casual flying, they work, so I can't knock them for that. But it doesn't tell you which module or which antenna is in use, so really you don't have a way of truly knowing if it is working. And for me, the benefit would be that I can put my Bandicoot patch on here for when I'm flying my micros with linear antennas, and on the other side I can put the Pico patch on there for when I'm flying circularly polarized, and I don't have to remove them when I switch between models. But just flying in my field, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. And the future possibilities for modules in this system, it really depends on how many people buy them. Now, it does have a strange startup sequence when you put the Furious module in along with the stock module on the other side. It first powers up the Furious module and then powers up the right hand side, and your video will go static as it realizes that both aren't on the same frequency, and then it switches back to the left. I don't think that's a bug. I think it's more of a way of how it figures out which module is in use and that they're not in sync, so therefore it will favor the one that is on the left. So that's diversity covered. Next, let's talk about the battery. So it's very similar to the Fat Shark design with its cutouts, and it's a 1800 milliamp 2S with a USB charging port on the side, and it's got a balance cable that's not to be used for charging and has no other function, so perhaps there's some future plans with that, I don't know. It has a charging indicator on it, and it also has an LED with a button, so it tells you how much charge is in there, and it will start to beep if the battery gets too low. The DC cable is really long, and that's because it's designed to sit at the back of the goggle in a strap, so your usual Fat Shark batteries won't have a long enough lead to work. I guess you could bodge them into the side of the Velcro strap, but they aren't designed for that. And yes, there is no power button. Now, I'm in the no power button camp. I'm sorry, I don't get it. If these DC jacks were wearing out, then maybe, but they aren't, and I'm a really heavy user. And if you are getting used to leaving the battery plugged in, then I can't see how a button or a switch is going to help you to remember to turn the goggles off. Surely it's just as easy to forget to press a button as to unplug a connector. But there you go, that is just my opinion, and I'm dreading when Fat Shark add a button to their goggles, because they're gonna do it and it's gonna suck. As for power consumption, it's not bad actually. I used them for a full day of testing and it had a couple of bars left on the light indicator, so I think they're good for about an hour of them being turned on. They do power from USB if you want to use a power bank, so there's some more innovation there, but they don't power from my computer. I guess my USB port can't provide enough amps, so it tries to boot up but then it shuts down, and it's not showing as a device within the computer either, but the manual does say that it's for firmware upgrading as well. So while I'm underneath, we have the DC port where the battery plugs in. It is the same size as the Fat Shark DC plug, and we also have a headphone jack, and the volume of that is found in the menu system rather than being on a button on the top. The IPD adjusters do move independently to each other, and then on the other side we have the switch for the fan. So yes, the fan is integrated into the goggle and it's not part of the faceplate. It seems to do its job and doesn't dry out your eyes like the Top Skies did, but I'll put this out there, I'm not a fan user. I usually put the goggles on my head to warm them up, and then I usually don't have any fogging issues. So next to that we have a HDMI port, and you're given a cable for that, which is a mini on one end and a full size on the other. So for HDMI to work, you have to have the goggles turned on first and then plug in the HDMI input, otherwise the goggle won't recognize an input. Then on the top, it's a short press to cycle through the different modes. So it has RF mode, then HDMI 2D and 3D, and AV 2D and 3D. So for 1080p inputs, it only accepts a refresh rate of 30 Hz. If you try 60 Hz, you'll get lines all over the screen. And for 720p input, it accepts 60 Hz. So it's a little bit picky when it comes to the formatting, but it does work. And then next to that is the AV in and out, so it acts as a video input in the AV in mode, so for 2D and 3D, and that works. The jack is the same order as the Fat Sharks, but I couldn't get it to output anything, and the instructions say that it should do both, so I'm feeding that back. So the menu button on the top, if you long press it for one beep, it goes into this race mode, and it's the same thing that they did with the EV100s to space pilots apart. And if you hold it for another beep, it goes into the auto scan function, and just like the Top Skies, this is really slow and it constantly beeps loudly as it tries to find a channel, and once it starts you can't stop it, so I wouldn't actually recommend using it. Instead, I'd use the channel buttons, so going up and down on these changes your 8 individual channels, and then a long press of either of them goes through the different bands, and that changes on the screen as well. And if you don't like the information on the screen, then you can short press these two buttons together, and that gets rid of all of it. And these goggles support every single channel as far as I can see. And boy, that was a lot of stuff, wasn't it? So all that's left to show you is what else you get in the package. So we have a hard case to put them in, and that has a little compartment for storing stuff as well. You get a USB cable and a wipe cloth. You get the instructions and a sheet that tells you how to clip the faceplate in. I guess they don't want you, snapping it. And the box does look like it's ready to ship with all of its graphics on there. And that's about it. I hope I covered everything for you guys, and I'll keep you updated if anything changes. So if you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up, and if you can afford to do so, then I'll link to my Patreon in the below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.